Hi, I'm Tim, welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. Can the original GMT Master II hold its own against the newest and hottest thing? The GMT Master II Sophia Loren goes head-to-head with the Batman. It's the new kid on the block versus the first of the line. Let's talk about the new hotness, or, as was said of Hansel in Zoolander, it's so hot right now. This, launched in 2019, is the Rolex Oyster Perpetual GMT Master II 126710 BLNR. It officially replaces the 2013 to 2018 GMT Batman Black and Blue or Dark Knight. Whatever nickname you use, the watch was red hot, the first ever black and blue bezel GMT. It gave way to a model that revived a long-running tradition, not the first of the modern supercase Jubilees, no, that honor went to the Pepsi back in 2018, but by reimagining a modern classic, Rolex created a stunning watch. I will say that it looks and wears very different from the old Oyster bracelet black and blue. First, it feels lighter on the wrist, and second, it feels a bit more comfortable. It also has a little bit more of a dress watch air to it, as the 5-link Jubilee is generally associated with Datejusts and even day dates. Now on my wrist, 16 centimeters in circumference, you can see that this is a 40 millimeter watch, and while both of these watches are technically 40 millimeters, this particular 40 millimeter wears a little bit more like a 41 or a 42. Blame the super case. But the watch is not thick, 12.1 millimeters thick. I was actually surprised at how slender this one is on the wrist. Now, the transition from the Oyster to the Jubilee style bracelet does make the watch a little bit slimmer across the wrist. The case itself is 48 millimeters from lug to lug, and if you measure the bracelet, it does project a little bit outward from the lugs. It's still a very reasonable 49.5 millimeters. All the same, it does wear far more massive than the old GMT Master II 16760. Let's jump to the bracelet and take a quick look at what a modern Super Jubilee has to offer. Quite a bit as it happens. You can see polished centers, solid center links, solid end link profiles, although they are pivoted to make for better ergonomics. You can see that the polish and satin finish is immaculate. The removable links are fixed by screws, and the clasp is far more sophisticated and far more durable than what you're going to find on the old 16760. It is a double locker, so it has a beak and a hook system. You can see the pivot of the lift lock lift trigger right there. There is a beak, there's a hook, the two snap together. That's the first lock. This is the second lock. So this is a very robust system, and it's fully polished inside and out, as this new milled generation clasp is generally polished internally when you're looking at one of its flagship models. And this is a flagship model, polished on the outside, polished on the inside, with the Easylink system that allows you to add or remove length simply by snicking and snapping. There's also divots inside, so you can use those little divot patterns as well as the tracks that help guide the spring bar into position to change the anchoring of the bracelet inside the clasp. So that's the fit and the feel. We'll talk a little bit about the case. You can see the flanks are black polished, but they're also rather sheer and the lugs are squared off. Here is where we can really chart the changes. Looking at the lug profiles of a super case with an original 40 millimeter and still largely intact a GMT Master II from the perforated lug pivoted end link era. You can see the pre-super case watch almost has the appearance of a dress watch with an elegant taper, and you can see this one in good condition. It's a 9.6 million serial number. Still has a good deal of the original factory bevel present and correct on all four lugs. So you could just see how much has changed. It's rather dramatic. It isn't subtle in any way, and it creates the appearance of a far more industrial and brutal timepiece on the modern BLNR. That said, the watch is handsome and upbeat, as it features the combination of blues and blacks, silvers and whites that have made this model a modern day icon. The bezel features a ceramic insert with all of the indices filled with platinum, and I will mention that it does have a nice chunky detent to it that's often missing in most GMT bezels. It doesn't have the solid snappy ratchet of a dive watch, but it's better than most aviator bezels. Of course, 2 time zones, 24 hours, 12, both on the dial, all gloss and white gold. It should be noted that the GMT Master II 16760 introduced to the GMT Masters the gloss dial and the white gold indices and hands. Now, of course, you have the Cerachrom, which is highly scratch resistant, and then on the inside, you have a new movement, which is highly shock resistant. Full balance bridge and a free sprung index, overcoil hairspring, chronometer certification, anti-magnetic, niobium zirconium parachrom blue alloy, a new Rolex Chronergy escapement, and an enlarged mainspring inside, a thinned out mainspring barrel, giving the watch a 70-hour power reserve versus the previous BLNR and its caliber 3186 that had a 48-hour power reserve. So technology is your friend here. It makes your watch more accurate with the chronometer certification, the multi-position adjustment. It makes it tougher with the free-sprung balance, the full balance bridge, and of course the anti-magnetic alloy of the hairspring. The watch is also 100 meters water resistant, and I take that rather seriously because the watch features a trip-lock crown rather than the twin-lock crown that's generally featured on the 100-meter Rolex watches. The trip-lock is what you'll find on the Sea Dwellers and the Submariners. So I suspect the 100-meter water resistance here is quite conservative. Sapphire crystal, and that is a feature that it shares with the Sophia Loren. Now, while this watch is sometimes called the Fat Lady, I kind of feel in our era it's time to phase out that language. I like the Sophia Loren nomenclature, so I'm going to go with it. That said, the watch was notably thicker than the GMT Master of its time, and at 12.9 millimeters thick, it does remain thicker than the GMT Master II BLNR on the table today. The watch wears easily. It feels like a vintage watch, and in many ways it is a vintage watch, as the initial versions of this timepiece, now 37 years old, this is a 9.6 million serial number, so late 1987, early 1988, this would have been just about the end of the line for the original GMT Master II. It bowed in 1983, and it was a watch full of firsts. It was the first true dual time, that is independent 12 and 24-hour hand GMT, so the GMT Master II line arrived. It was also the first of the Coke bezels, and it was only ever made with the Coke bezels. It introduced the gloss lacquer dial with the white gold hands and white gold indices, so that was another important first, and it was a 100-meter water-resistant watch. It wasn't the first to feature a sapphire crystal. That was one of the precious metal examples of the previous GMT Master, but in the steel case, it was the first to feature the sapphire crystal. So now 100 meters, dual time, sapphire crystal, Coke bezel. This watch is the business, or it was back in 83. You could see 40 millimeters in diameter, but a very different 40 than the BLNR. The watch is 12.9 thick. It features 20 millimeter spacing between the lugs, and from lug to lug, this watch is actually very similar to the modern watch, as it measures 47.8 millimeters. The timepiece is comfortable and, again, a vintage experience because of the pivoted end links, the hollow end links, and hollow center links, giving this bracelet, though in excellent condition, a little bit of that vintage Rolex rattle. It has more inherent play, even brand new from the factory, than the new bracelet does. This is a 78360 with 501B end links for those of you who are keeping score, and you can see that. You can also appreciate that this is early days for Rolex Clasp technology, as we have a snap clasp that is in excellent condition. We decided not to refinish this vintage watch. And the clasp itself features no special locking system. It's friction fit, and there are several perforations internally so you can change the anchoring point of the bracelet. Rolex was looking ahead, however, in its bracelet technology, as we were using screws at this point rather than pin sleeves. Rolex always doing right by its owners, and assuming back then that you were just as likely to put the watch on a strap. After all, a professional pilot would. There are holes in the lugs to make use of a strap tool easier. You can also see just how much of that original beveling is still present on this watch. It's in excellent condition. So too is the Coke bezel, so named because of the combination of red and black. This was a compliment to the root beers and the Pepsis of the era, and I should mention that here you can use this bezel, just as you can on the new BLNR, to temporarily read 3 time zones by setting the 24-hour hand to Greenwich Mean Time. Then you use the local airport offset or port offset from GMT to use the bezel to find a 3rd time zone. The dial is in excellent condition. You can see it's original tritium and deliciously faded. This is no Fotina. This is the real thing. It's gone past ecru. It's almost a sort of granulated pumpkin. The watch features a lovely red GMT hand, and of course you can see the tritium signature at the base. The dial, though lacquer, and lacquer from a period when lacquer technology was touch and go at Rolex, has not experienced any undue crazing or degradation. How about those lovely vintage open 6s and 9s? And there were 2 different generations of this dial. All of them were lacquer and gloss, but you could see that initially they did not list date on the watch, and from about 1984, late 1984 to the end, they were Oyster Perpetual date. Mid-1984 back to 1983, they did not say date. Underneath the case back, a breakthrough movement, 27 jewels, automatic winding, 42 to 45 hour power reserve, and critically, 12 24-hour dual time. This is the Rolex caliber 3085. It was considerably chunkier than the movements in the standard GMT Masters. It has a half-balance bridge, 27 jewels, but it still has the free-sprung index, the overcoil hairspring, and the chronometer certification of the modern BLNR. So it also features a high-beat movement. In many respects, with stop seconds, the true dual-time function, 100-meter water resistance, a sapphire crystal, chronometer certification, 5-position adjustment, the high-beat movement, you can wear this watch like a modern watch. It doesn't particularly need to be babied, and that sets it apart from most true vintage Rolex watches from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s that now need to be worn with some reservations and a little bit of a circumspect manner. You have to plan ahead when you're wearing those. This watch can still perform as originally advertised, unless, of course, we're talking about the glow of the dial. Which brings me to advantages. We need to talk about them. First, the advantages of the modern BLNR. Well, the Batman is back with a different look. I would say this one's more suited to Bruce Wayne than Batman, with the more genteel Jubilee style bracelet, but the tech is the same as ever. Its advantages over the old watch start with size and presence on the wrist. This is a timepiece that more vocally projects status as the latest and greatest than the old watch does. It may not necessarily be the watch for vintage mavens and the deep connoisseur, but this is a watch that's definitely going to get more attention. First, because it's better known, and second, because it's just so much bigger. I'll also mention that from a more substantive standpoint, this is a much more durable watch. True, they're both 100 meters with a sapphire crystal, but this modern movement with its full bridge, its anti-magnetic hairspring, its recent manufacture, the stress testing that goes into modern Rolex watches, the trip-lock crown, I guarantee you that though they're comparably spec'd, this is the more durable watch in almost every single way, right down to the ceramic scratch-proof bezel. On water resistance, scratch resistance of the bezel, shock resistance, anti-magnetism, this is the one to wear every day without concern. I'll also mention that with a power reserve of 70 hours versus 45 for the other one, this is a watch that's easier to circulate amongst a collection of watches without concern about it running down. And if you want lume with Chromolite Luminova, this is the only game in town. The old tritium dial has given up the ghost. The half-life of tritium is 12.4 years, and this one has long since expired. So if you like to use your watch 24 hours a day, on a 24-hour watch, Luminova is apropos. I'll also mention that the timepiece features the technology of niobium zirconium blue oxidized to make it highly anti-magnetic. So while it's not a Milgauss, it is far, far more anti-magnetic than the older watch, important in modern office conditions. It has a better bracelet in every way. The links are all solid. This version of the Jubilee is more solid than the Oyster bracelet from the 1980s. And you can see the clasp, well, there's nothing like it on the vintage watch. From the double locking system to the solidity of the milled out components to the Easylink system and its ease of adjustment, this watch has it all over the vintage timepiece from a practical and durable standpoint. This one is scoring a chain of victories, and they continue as the timepiece is still available new, and because it came out in 2019, every single version available, even a pre-owned one, if it was purchased at an authorized dealer, is going to have years of warranty left. If you want to wait and buy this one new, and there will be a wait, make no mistake, you're going to get the full 5-year warranty, something that's utterly impossible on a vintage watch, even one sold by an upstanding dealer that might give you 15, 18, 24 months of house warranty. That's nothing like half a decade of the factory. And finally, I should mention that some folks just prefer the look of this watch. It's not about status or stature, but for some the combination of silver and black and blue is just more attractive. There are going to be those who prefer the Jubilee bracelet. If you want a watch that has all of those features, this is the only game in town between the two options today. But now let's talk about the old school GMT Master II. The original Master II has a lot going for it. First and foremost, intangibles. If you've ever heard that word soul appended to a description of a vintage watch, well, it's appropriate here, and it certainly applies. Everything from that lovely pre-supercase profile to the Rolex rattle of the bracelet to the faded, almost pumpkin tone lume of the hands and the indices. This is a timepiece that is a Rolex of a kinder and gentler era, and that comes across both in the way it feels and the way it looks. Let's talk about price. Now, obviously, the watch that you see here retails for $9,250, and at that price, it would cost a bit less than this. But the reality is that to buy this watch and own it immediately, that is to own it in 2019, if you're not already on a wait list and right at the front, you're going to have to pay about $20,000 to buy this watch used, whereas these range from about $10,000 for a Taddy example with no boxes and papers, to $15,000 for the best example in the world, possibly Tiffany co-signed with all the boxes, papers, and original sales invoice. Now, I should also mention appreciation potential. I can easily foresee a scenario in which the next economic decline sees this watch devalued to something resembling its MSRP, whereas I can see this watch only gaining value over time. Its depreciation is decades removed from the present, and it has been solidly gaining as people recognize that after the Paul Newmans, after the Big Crown subs, after the Bakelite bezel GMTs, the next frontier in true vintage Rolex is the 80s, and this is smack dab in the middle as one of the most important references from that era. I'll also mention the Oyster bracelet and the Coke bezel. Some folks prefer this look, and between these two, this would be the victor in that regard. I'll also mention that if you have a smaller wrist, this watch would wear well on a wrist as small as 13 centimeters, whereas I would say probably 14 and a half centimeters is the lower limit for this. It really does wear like a 42. At the end of the day, this is a historically important watch with appreciation potential, that intangible, soul, and almost all of the day-to-day functionality of the newer watch. For all of those reasons, and my personal preference of Coke over what I perceive to be an RC Cola bezel, I'm going to go with the GMT Master II, the vintage model, the 9.6 million serial, as my choice amongst the two. You guys let me know, which of these two watches would you choose? If price were no object, and hell, let's say if price is an object, let me know both ways in the comments below.